Hello, Rabbi Phillips. Welcome. I'm Daron Kornbluth here at Mosaica, for those who I haven't met yet, and this is Rabbi Shmuel Phillips, who is the
Hi,
author.
good morning.
The author of this incredible book, Judaism Reclaimed. Can you see the subtitle there clearly on the screen? Philosophy and Theology in the Torah. That's the wrong side. It's a beautiful book. But I want to tell you, Rabbi Phillips, that, because I help run Mosaica, I get a free copy of books. And usually I've edited a lot of them myself. And a lot of times I'll go and I'll after it's out in physical form, I'll go through it once. And that's it. I put it on my shelf and I'm very proud of it. Yours is one of the few that I keep going back to because there is, it's an amazing, amazing work. And it's rare that you have such a combination of, it's not a combination, it's rare you have such a discussion of philosophy and Torah. And that's what I think people are like really interested in. And that's why the book is already in reprint. I know that's, it's doing well and it's getting a lot of, press. So tell me, when you think back, at least from my knowledge of Jewish history, which I'm amateur historian, I'm big amateur, small historian, philosophy used to be central to Jewish thought. I mean, you had eras where philosophy was huge in Judaism, and it seems to have fallen out of favor with many parts of the Torah community. Not all, Rav Soloveitchik was, huge in it, obviously. But why do you think that happened? Any explanation of why suddenly it became, in many parts of the Torah world, became like philosophies for the Goyim?
Well, if we look back to the period of the Rishonim, we have people like the Rambam, who's always seen as the figurehead of Jewish philosophy, and the golden era of Jewish philosophy. That sort of era, that sort of community, those sort of Rishonim were very much dealing with the big philosophical questions that were troubling the world, but giving it a Jewish perspective. As the time progressed, and there's a lot of the Rambam's Talmidim, things carried on in a way which not everyone was happy with. They took a lot of the Rambam's conclusions, people would say too far, in a way that the Rambam wasn't necessarily happy with, things he wouldn't have said himself, allegorizing things, giving too much emphasis to the Aristotelian thought and lavdafkering, so to speak, riding roughshod over some of the principles of the Torah. There was a big pushback by many of the other Rishonim. You have the Ramban, you have the Baalei Tosfos, who weren't happy with the way in which the Jewish philosophical schools were going. And
for the students of the Rambam, the generations after, that was the more.
You always have a question with a Rav, people who are claiming to be his students, who's his students, who aren't his students. But yeah, generally, if you look here, the Rambam, as well as being the big philosopher, had his Ikrei Emunah, things which we hold on to this day. And if you had some of these Talmidim were allegorizing and pushing philosophy in a way which seemed to compromise some of the Ikrei Emunah. So there was a big pushback against a lot of against the whole approach, really. Yep. You had, as Kabbalah became more widespread, also that gave a different approach, a different emphasis, and for many years that became the primary path. Till you hit the
why is that? That's exactly what I was thinking as you were speaking about. I remember when I first came to Eretz Yisrael. When I first came to Eretz Yisrael, and I would go to all different kinds of shiurim, and shiva, whatever, and I would try to broaden my mind. And I didn't understand any of the Kabbalistic stuff. I just didn't understand it at all. And I mentioned it to a Talmud Chacham friend of mine, and he said, "Listen, the philosophers lost, the Kabbalists won. You better learn how to speak this language." Right? Is that true?
So again, it depends if you ask the philosophers or the Kabbalists. I do in my Judaism Reclaimed. I'd say obviously it emphasizes the philosophical side of things. They're also going to the more modern philosophical approaches of people like Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who's taking a more sort of Kantian modern view of things. But I do very much try to explain things, modern questions, which people don't necessarily feel are satisfactorily answered from the Kabbalistic perspective, or they don't understand the answers. And they have a lot to gain from the sort of answers, the sort of explanations, the sort of approaches that Rav Hirsch and the Rambam were pushing.
Are they in contradiction, the Kabbalistic approach and the philosophical approach? Is it really loggerheads?
In some ways, yes. I also try to show, from our perspective, when it comes to anything, any machlokes, we have the principle of Elu ve'elu divelo kemachayim. As far as I'm concerned, this is what I write in a couple of chapters, we have a Messiah that's come to us. We know it's fragmented. We know there's machlokes in it. And we know there's a mystical tradition, and we know there's a more philosophical tradition. And both sides, if you look at it, both the Kabbalists and the Rambam and his colleagues will accuse the others of being corrupted. The Rambam writes in Moreh Nevuchim and elsewhere that the whole mystical side of Judaism really came about through Jews being in Golos in pagan countries and taking on certain aspects of the pagan cultures. Obviously, there is some kind of mystical tradition there, but the Rambam held it became corrupted. And obviously, you've got the Vilna Gaon on the other side, saying that the Rambam became corrupted by the Greek philosophy and his Judaism was corrupted. So you have both sides claiming that they have the true Messiah and the other one was corrupted. And I say, when we have that today, we have to say, Elu Velu Devrei Elokim Chaim, and we have to try and, to the extent we can, reconcile what we can, and to the extent that we can't, just accept that we have these two voices in our tradition and try and live with them both. And these are the sort of Jerochim I try to develop in my book.
Well, and you develop it very, very well. I remember reading that when the Greeks first encountered the Jews about 300 BCE, their thinkers called us a nation of philosophers. Have you heard that phrase before? That was their name for the Jews.
I haven't heard the exact phrase, but if you read Josephus, which again predates all of these machlokes of the Rambam and the Kabbalists, he quotes Greek historians who talk with great reverence about how the Jews and Moshe Rabbeinu taught these great philosophical principles, and they weren't, with the Greeks, you had the great philosophers, but they were detached from the people. The people had all their Greek gods and their paganism and idolatry, and the great Greek philosophers were above that, and they had the great developed, elevated thoughts. Whereas the Greek philosophers talk in awe about how the Jews were a philosophical people, and it wasn't just kept to Moshe and the Zakanim and the Nevi'im who understood these great philosophical thoughts and the Chachamim, but it was widespread among the whole nation. They were in awe of it. Josephus talks about this quite often, quoting from the Greek historians. So that's something which I find very interesting. But more than just tracking the divide between the Rambam and the Kabbalists, I try to show how questions that we deal with today, questions of modern biblical criticism, various academic criticisms of the Torah, how these are things that really trouble a lot of. I've been in touch with people that have left yeshiva world, and they turn around and they're confronted with various questions, and they're not sure how to respond. And I find if we look within obviously Kabbalah's got its own responses, which not everyone finds accessible, readily understandable, without investing a lot of time in it. But Rambam and Rav Hirsch are the sort of approaches that can really face up to these challenges and help a lot of people, I find. And people are unaware that there are voices within our Messiah, within our Jewish tradition, that can really help tackle serious questions that people struggle with nowadays.
Well, what I love about Judaism Reclaimed is that you go through so many serious issues. I mean, you did it Lafi, the Seder of the Parshas, but it really doesn't have that much to do with the Parsha. It's just 50 odd major subjects. Now, one quick thing in our last, we have a couple minutes left, but there was a little controversy when your book came out, as I remember, that you were accused by a prominent commentator as being a Haredi apologist, and you subtly, very gently pointed out that true, while you have Rabbi Leff's Haskama, you also have Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs saying this is the work of a major new talent in Jewish thought. One of the highest compliments that I've actually seen him give. And so has that sort of controversy added some insights to the process? If more people come on to you, have you gotten feedback, fan letters?
Well, it was quite an interesting controversy altogether, because that attack came from sort of the rationalist Judaism blog, which takes the rationalist side, the Rambam side, very much down a certain route. And it's very uncompromising, particularly academic approach to the Rambam, which views him very much as the arch philosopher. And I do take a more philosophical approach to the Rambam, but I also try to show how, to an extent, there are ways of reconciling what he holds of, let's say, the hashgacha with the more mainstream Jewish thought. Not that he's the same. Obviously, there are deep divides there, but we don't have to put him right all the way to one side and the rest of Jewish tradition on the other side. And that led to some kind of kickback, because the whole rationalist Judaism, I don't know how much you're aware of it, approach is pushing a very extreme approached the Rambam, and he didn't hold of any hashgacha at all. He doesn't hold of this. He doesn't hold of that. Which is, there are certain academic approaches to that, but it's not the only approach, even within academia. And my response to this criticism was to show how the sources that I was drawing upon in these chapters were not Haredi sources. I was drawing upon other academic voices which aren't always heard in the Jewish rationalist world, to show how Rambam doesn't necessarily have to be viewed this way. Likewise, in the area of biblical criticism, there are voices within academia who critique the way in which these academics challenge the Torah and say that these challenges aren't as strong as they first appear. And these voices aren't always heard. They're not the loudest voices. People who want to criticize the Torah will publicize the big attacks on the Torah, and the academics are sort of saying, hang on, there are big gaps and there are big presumptions being made within these challenges which don't necessarily hold up to scrutiny. It's not so exciting to bring these up, and they often get ignored. So I'm drawing a lot upon fellow academic sources and non-Haredi sources, but to make points which often get ignored in these discussions, certainly in the Jewish context.
Listen, Rabbi Phillips, I would love personally to discuss this with you for hours, but the world today, our clips have to be short. Bli Nader, I would love if you would come back sometime and we could discuss some more about this amazing book and this re-engaging the Torah world in philosophy, which is absolutely wonderful. And God willing, you'll be doing a lot of Zoom lectures all over the world in the coming months, and talking.
Thank you very much. It has certainly been some sort of revival, as you've seen in the reaction on social media. There's been a lot of interest. I mean, when I first started sending the manuscript around I sent it around to Rabbanim, I also sent it around to academics who are involved in Jewish philosophy. And a lot of the reaction I got was, yes, its content is great, but who's going to read this? Is the Orthodox Jews, the Haredim, want to read the certain sort of the standards, in one of the Tochen books, and people in the academic world would read academic books. Who's going to read a book on sort of a well-written book on Jewish philosophy? And there's no market.
We've seen that people are buying it and people are reading it. Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Okay, the book is Judaism Reclaimed by Rabbi Shmuel Phillips, Philosophy and Theology in the Torah. Thank you very much. You should be safe and healthy.
Well, thank you.